Room 230 of the Al Bustan Rotana Hotel in Dubai, January 19, 2010. Mahmoud al-Mabou entered just after 8 in the evening, carrying a single briefcase and wearing a dark jacket despite the desert heat. He used the keycard, pushed the door open, and stepped inside without checking the corridor behind him. The first mistake. 4 men watched him from different positions in the hotel. 2 sat in the lobby with newspapers they weren't reading. 1 stood near the elevators, checking his phone repeatedly. The 4th waited on the second floor, positioned where he could see both stairwells and the main corridor. They wore business casual clothing, khakis, polo shirts, light jackets, tourist clothes, forgettable faces. Al-Mabou was a senior Hamas military commander who'd spent 20 years organizing weapons shipments from Iran through Sudan into Gaza. Israeli intelligence believed he'd personally facilitated the kidnapping and murder of 2 Israeli soldiers in 1989. He lived in Damascus, protected by Syrian security, rarely leaving the country. His trip to Dubai was unusual but necessary. He needed to finalize payment for a shipment of Chinese-made rockets. The surveillance team had tracked him from Damascus International Airport. 8 operatives total, though only 4 were in the hotel at any given time. The others maintained outer perimeter surveillance, watching for counterintelligence, tracking local security patrols. Standard procedure for a Kidon operation on foreign soil. Kidon. The Hebrew word means bayonet or tip of the spear. The unit officially doesn't exist in any Israeli government document, no budget line item, no organization chart, no public acknowledgement from Mossad, but intelligence services worldwide know the name. They teach case studies about Kidon operations in spy schools from Langley to Moscow. Al-Mabou locked his hotel room door and set his briefcase on the luggage rack. He removed his jacket, hung it in the closet, and made a brief phone call discussing arrival times and meeting locations. He didn't know that 4 floors above him, Israeli signals intelligence officers were recording every word through a laser microphone aimed at his window. The operation commander sat in a rented apartment 3 kilometers from the hotel. She was 42, with 15 years in Kidon and a record of 11 successful operations across 4 continents. Her team called her Gail that night, not her real name. She monitored 6 video feeds on laptop screens, each showing different camera angles around the hotel. The surveillance team had placed miniature cameras in the corridors days before, hidden inside smoke detectors and exit signs. Gail reviewed the timeline. Al-Mabou would likely sleep soon after 9 hours of travel. The team's window extended from roughly midnight to 5 in the morning, when hotel corridors were emptiest, when security personnel were most fatigued, when suspicious activity drew the least attention. They'd rehearsed the operation 16 times in a mock-up hotel room in Tel Aviv. Every movement choreographed, every contingency planned. 2 members of the entry team arrived separately just after 11 that night. One carried a French passport identifying him as Peter Elvinger. The other had a German passport in the name Gail Folliard. Both passports were genuine documents issued by their respective governments, but the names belonged to Israeli citizens living in Europe who'd volunteered their passport details for intelligence operations. Identity borrowing. The 2 men met on the second floor near a service area. Peter produced a small black case from his jacket pocket, looked like a smartphone charger, functioned as a portable lock decoder. The device could read the magnetic signature from a hotel keycard system and generate a master key within 45 seconds. Al-Mabou was sleeping. The audio surveillance confirmed his breathing patterns had shifted to deep sleep. The thermal camera from a van parked outside showed a single heat signature on the bed, motionless. Peter inserted the decoder against the lock mechanism on room 230's door. The device clicked after 38 seconds. The light changed from red to green. The door opened 6 centimeters. Peter held it there, waiting, listening. Nothing. Al-Mabou continued sleeping. The 2 men entered together. Gail watched their heat signatures merge with the bed's heat pattern. Movement for 90 seconds. Then stillness. Al-Mabou stopped breathing at 12:27 a.m. The 2 operatives left the room at 12:31, taking the stairwell to the ground floor and exiting through the parking garage, where a third operative waited in a rental car. The vehicle pulled into traffic at exactly the speed limit. No rushing, no panic, professional extraction. Housekeeping found the body at 1:15 p.m. when Al-Mabou failed to check out. The hotel manager called Dubai police. The responding officers noted unusual details: bruising around the eyes and nose, broken blood vessels, no obvious wounds, no signs of struggle. The room was orderly. His belongings remained packed. The police investigator who arrived suspected this was something more than natural death. He was correct. The autopsy revealed that Al-Mabou had been suffocated, held down by multiple attackers with pressure applied to his face until asphyxiation occurred. Traces of succinylcholine were found in his bloodstream, a paralytic drug used in surgical anesthesia that causes temporary muscle paralysis while leaving the victim conscious and able to feel everything. The drug's presence suggested a particular methodology. The victim had been immobilized chemically before being killed manually. Dubai police reviewed the hotel's security camera footage. The recording showed something initially impossible. 27 different people had been near room 230 in the hours before and after Al-Mabou's death. All wore casual clothing. All carried European passports. None appeared connected. The police technology unit began tracking each individual through the camera system. 3 people had been on the second floor near Al-Mabou's room around midnight. 2 had left immediately afterward, catching taxis to the airport. The others dispersed to different hotels across Dubai before departing on separate flights. Lieutenant Colonel Khamis Matan Almazena coordinated the investigation. This operation demonstrated sophistication that narrowed the suspect list considerably. State-level intelligence service, multiple operatives, extensive surveillance, cloned passports, careful planning. The target's identity suggested which state. The passport names checked against Interpol's database. Peter Elvinger was a real person, a French citizen who'd reported his passport stolen 4 months earlier. Gail Folliard was a German national who still possessed her original passport and had never traveled to Dubai. The pattern repeated across all 27 suspects. Real names, real people, cloned documents. The investigation leaked to media within 72 hours. Al Jazeera identified Al-Mabou and suggested Israeli involvement. CNN showed grainy security camera images of suspects walking through hotel corridors. The footage was everywhere within a day. Dubai police released the photographs officially, asking for international assistance. This was unprecedented. Surveillance of an assassination team, caught on camera, shown to the world. Intelligence services rarely got caught. When they did, governments usually denied everything and the story faded. This time was different. The evidence was too public. In Tel Aviv, Mossad leadership convened an emergency meeting. The operation had succeeded. Al-Mabou was dead. But the operational security failure was catastrophic. Burned passports, exposed operatives, compromised methodology, international embarrassment. The Dubai operation became a case study for what happens when perfect planning meets imperfect execution. The team had done everything according to protocol. Surveillance detection routes, multiple operatives, rapid extraction, professional tradecraft. But they'd missed something critical. The hotel had upgraded its security camera system 3 weeks before the operation. The new cameras had higher resolution and better low-light capability. The intelligence preparation had been based on outdated information. One oversight, one miscalculation. And now the world was watching. The question facing Mossad wasn't whether the operation would be linked to Israel. Everyone already knew. The question was what came next. How to protect operatives whose faces were in every police database worldwide. How to rebuild operational capacity where surveillance had intensified dramatically. How to maintain Kidon's deterrent effect while adapting to an environment where cameras were everywhere. But there was another question, deeper and more troubling. Kidon had operated for decades in absolute secrecy, executing operations that shaped Middle Eastern security policy. The Dubai operation exposed something the Israeli intelligence community had believed impossible, that Kidon could be caught, identified, documented. And if Kidon could be caught in Dubai, where else might they be vulnerable? The answer was already developing in Iran, where scientists working on nuclear enrichment were beginning to die in ways that looked accidental but weren't. Masoud Ali Mohammadi left his home in northern Tehran at 7:30 on January 12, 2010, 7 days before the Dubai operation. He was a particle physicist, 50 years old, professor at Tehran University. His academic work was public and legitimate. His classified work for Iran's nuclear program was neither. The bomb was attached to a motorcycle parked across the street, remote detonated. When Ali Mohammadi's Peugeot sedan pulled out of his driveway, the triggerman pressed the button. The motorcycle exploded with enough force to flip the car and shatter windows in a 30-meter radius. Ali Mohammadi died instantly. Iranian authorities blamed Israel within hours. They were correct. The operation bore Kidon's signature: precise targeting, minimal collateral damage, rapid extraction, no attribution beyond circumstantial evidence. The motorcycle technique was deliberate. It looked like terrorism, but was actually surgical assassination. The bomb contained just enough explosive to kill the target without destroying surrounding buildings. This was the first in a series. Over the next 4 years, 5 Iranian nuclear scientists would die in similar attacks: car bombs, motorcycle bombs, magnetic mines, sniper fire. Each targeted a specific individual involved in Iran's uranium enrichment program. Each sent the same message: work on nuclear weapons development, and Israel will find you. The creation of Kidon as a dedicated assassination unit emerged from a specific moment. After the 1972 Munich Olympics massacre, where Palestinian terrorists killed 11 Israeli athletes, Prime Minister Golda Meir authorized Operation Wrath of God, find everyone involved in planning and executing the Munich attack, and kill them. Mossad's existing structure wasn't designed for sustained assassination operations. The agency needed a dedicated unit with specialized training, compartmentalized operations, and personnel who could function in deep cover for extended periods. The initial team was small, 12 operatives selected from Mossad's Caesarea division. They came from military special forces backgrounds: Sayeret Matkal, Shayatet 13. Other elite units where killing was a trained skill. They could shoot, fight, surveil, infiltrate, and disappear. The first operation occurred in Rome on October 16, 1972. The target was Wael Zweitzer, a Palestinian translator and PLO liaison officer. 2 Kidon operatives waited outside his apartment building. When Zweiter emerged from the elevator, they shot him 12 times with .22 caliber Beretta pistols fitted with suppressors. The weapons were chosen for the enclosed space: subsonic ammunition that wouldn't alert neighbors, small caliber that wouldn't overpenetrate walls. The operatives walked out through the rear exit, dropped the weapons in a storm drain, and caught a train to Switzerland before Italian police arrived. 11 more assassinations followed over 3 years: Paris, Cyprus, Beirut, London, Athens. Each operation used similar methodology: small teams, precise execution, immediate extraction. But Operation Wrath of God wasn't perfect. In 1973, 6 Kidon operatives killed a Moroccan waiter named Ahmed Bouchiki in Lillehammer, Norway, mistaking him for Ali Hassan Salameh, the Black September leader who'd planned Munich. Norwegian police arrested 5 of the 6 operatives, the first major compromise in Kidon's history. The Lillehammer disaster taught critical lessons. Target identification required multiple confirmation points. Local police capabilities varied dramatically. Operational security meant compartmentalization. The operatives arrested didn't know enough to compromise other operations, and mistakes would happen despite careful planning. The structure that emerged formed the template for modern Kidon. The unit operates within Mossad's Caesarea division, but maintains strict separation. Operatives are recruited from military special forces after they complete service, usually in their late 20s or early 30s. Selection focuses on psychological stability, language capability, and demonstrated competence in high-stress environments. Training lasts approximately 2 years. The first phase covers basic tradecraft, surveillance, counter-surveillance, dead drops, brush passes, encryption, safe house protocols. The second phase is Kidon-specific, advanced weapons training, close-quarters combat, explosives, poisons, interrogation resistance. Operatives learn to kill efficiently with firearms, knives, improvised weapons, and bare hands. The third phase covers legend building, creating false identities convincing enough to survive scrutiny. Operatives spend months living their cover stories, building supporting documentation. A legend claiming to be a Belgian telecommunications consultant means knowing Belgian geography, speaking French and Flemish credibly, understanding telecommunications technology, maintaining consistent details about fictional employers. The legend must be lived, not memorized. Active Kidon operatives work in cells, typically 3 to 5 people with complementary skills. One handles technical surveillance and communications. Another specializes in penetration and close quarters work. A third manages logistics and extraction. The cell operates with substantial autonomy once an operation begins. The unit size fluctuates between 40 and 60 operatives, though exact numbers remain classified. Not all are actively deployed. Some serve in training roles, planning positions, technical support. 5 years of active field work is considered the maximum before psychological strain requires rotation. By the early 2000s, Kidon had developed a reputation as the most effective assassination unit in operation. The CIA's Special Activities Division, Russia's Spetsnaz, Britain's SAS, all had elite operatives capable of targeted killing, but none matched Kidon's combination of selection, training, operational security, and sustained success rate. The unit's accomplishments between 1972 and 2010 included an estimated 200 successful operations across 6 continents. The Iranian nuclear scientist campaign demonstrated this capability. After al-Mohammadi's death in January 2010, Kidon killed Majid Shahriari in November using magnetic bombs attached to his car. Dariush Rezaeinejad died in July 2011, shot by motorcycle-borne attackers. Mostafa Ahmadi Roshan was killed in January 2012 with another magnetic bomb. Each operation used different personnel, different methodology, different tactics. Iranian security services tried to protect remaining scientists. They assigned bodyguards, varied travel routes, implemented electronic countermeasures. None of it stopped Kidon. The unit adapted to each security enhancement, finding new vulnerabilities, exploiting gaps in protection. When scientists used armored vehicles, Kidon used larger bombs. When security details increased, Kidon attacked during brief windows when targets were alone. The psychological impact exceeded the operational damage. Removing 5 scientists slowed development but didn't halt it. The real effect was creating fear. Researchers began requesting transfers out of weapons programs. Universities found it harder to recruit talent for nuclear-related fields. Every scientist who stayed worked knowing Israel knew their names, their addresses, their routines. This was deterrence through demonstration. Israel couldn't stop Iran's nuclear ambitions entirely through assassination, but it could raise the personal cost of participation. Each dead scientist was a message to survivors. Continue this work, and you're accepting a death sentence. The Iranian operations succeeded tactically while creating strategic complications. Each assassination strengthened hardliners within Iran's government who argued that Israel's aggression justified nuclear weapons development. Each killed scientist became a martyr used in propaganda. And each operation risked wider conflict. The decision-making involved careful calculation. Israeli intelligence assessed each scientist's contribution, weighed operational risk against benefit, considered potential Iranian responses, determined whether assassination would achieve strategic objectives beyond revenge. Some proposed operations were approved, others were rejected as too risky. Kidon's integration with other Mossad divisions made operations like the Iranian campaign possible. Collection Division provided intelligence on target locations. Technology Division supplied specialized equipment. Research Division analyzed Iranian security patterns. Cover specialists created legends for operatives infiltrating Iran. Logistics arranged safe houses, weapons caches, extraction routes. A single Kidon operation might involve 50 or 60 people, though only 3 or 4 entered the target zone. This support structure was both strength and vulnerability. More capability, but also more potential for compromise. The compartmentalization that protected tactical operations couldn't be absolute because operatives needed intelligence to function. After Dubai, Mossad implemented new protocols for operational intelligence sharing. Division heads met regularly to review operations and identify information gaps. Technical surveillance teams conducted more thorough assessments of target environments. Operations planning included mandatory security specialist reviews. The Iranian scientist campaign continued despite Dubai's exposure. Mostafa Ahmadi Roshan died 2 years after al-Mabhouh, proving Kidon's operational capability remained intact. Operations took longer to plan. Surveillance extended over months rather than weeks. Operatives used more sophisticated disguises and counter-surveillance techniques. But there was a deeper question emerging. The world was changing in ways that made traditional Kidon operations increasingly difficult. Smartphones meant everyone carried cameras. Social media meant photos spread instantly. Biometric systems made travel under false identities more complex. DNA evidence could identify operatives decades after operations. The techniques that worked in the 1970s were becoming obsolete. Some within Mossad argued that Kidon needed to fundamentally rethink its methodology. Instead of physical infiltration, use drones or long-range weapons. Instead of human operatives, use cyber attacks to cause accidents. Instead of assassination, use influence operations to neutralize threats without killing. Others insisted that physical operations remained essential. Cyber attacks were attribution ambiguous, reducing deterrent value. Drone strikes were politically complicated. Influence operations took too long. Traditional Kidon missions, send trained operatives to kill specific targets, remained necessary despite mounting challenges. The debate continued as operations proceeded. Kidon operatives kept working, adapting to surveillance technology, finding vulnerabilities in security systems. The unit's operational pace actually increased between 2010 and 2020. And then came Mohsen Fakhrizadeh. He was Iran's top nuclear scientist, director of the research program, coordinator of weapons development, untouchable for years behind layers of security. Western intelligence considered him the single most important target in Iran's nuclear infrastructure. Removing him wouldn't stop the program, but it would set back development significantly. Kidon had tried before. In 2008, operatives attempted to plant a bomb in his car, but aborted when security was too heavy. In 2012, a planned sniper operation was called off when Fakhrizadeh changed his schedule. The unit spent years developing options, waiting for an opening. In November 2020, they found one. Fakhrizadeh's convoy consisted of 3 vehicles, a lead car with security personnel, his armored Nissan sedan in the middle, and a trail car with additional guards. They traveled on the Imam Khomeini Highway toward Absard. The route was routine, though the timing varied. The Nissan's armor could withstand rifle fire and small explosives, bulletproof glass, reinforced doors, run-flat tires, standard security measures. The security vehicles carried armed guards trained in counter-ambush tactics. At 2:30 p.m. on November 27, 2020, the convoy slowed near Absard. Witnesses reported hearing gunfire. The lead security vehicle stopped suddenly. Fakhrizadeh's sedan halted between them, exposed. What happened next was unprecedented in assassination methodology. No operatives approached. No motorcycle-borne attackers appeared. No car bomb exploded. Instead, a Nissan pickup truck parked 150 meters away exploded, destroying itself and eliminating evidence. Because the truck had contained something unusual, a remote-controlled machine gun. The weapon was a Belgian-made FN mag, mounted on a robotic platform inside the truck bed, concealed under a tarp. The system included a camera, satellite communications uplink, and artificial intelligence targeting software. An operator somewhere controlled the weapon remotely, watching through the camera feed, adjusting aim, selecting targets. The first burst hit Fakhrizadeh through the windshield. The bulletproof glass slowed the rounds but didn't stop them. He was struck 3 times in the upper body. His wife, sitting in the passenger seat, wasn't hit. The targeting was precise enough to distinguish between a 60-year-old man and a 59-year-old woman sitting 40 centimeters apart in a moving vehicle. Security personnel tried to respond, but they faced an enemy they couldn't engage. The machine gun continued firing in controlled bursts, targeting security team members. 13 rounds total over approximately 15 seconds. Then the weapon triggered its self-destruct mechanism. The explosive charge in the pickup truck detonated, destroying the gun, control system, camera, and forensic evidence. Iranian investigators found fragments, metal pieces from the weapon mount, circuit boards from the control system, enough to reconstruct what happened, but not enough to trace origin. Every component was deliberately generic. Fakhrizadeh died in the hospital 3 hours later. Iranian authorities announced his death, calling it terrorism and promising retaliation against Israel. Supreme Leader Khamenei demanded punishment, but privately, Iranian officials understood they were facing a technological leap they hadn't anticipated and couldn't easily counter. This was Kidon's adaptation to modern surveillance. Traditional operations required human presence at the kill site, which meant exposure to cameras, witnesses, police response. Remote operations eliminated that vulnerability. No operatives in Iran meant no passport trail, no hotel cameras, no witnesses, no DNA evidence. The operation could be planned and executed entirely from outside Iranian territory. The technical sophistication represented years of development. The remote weapon system was engineered specifically for this mission by Israel's defense technology sector. The targeting software had been tested extensively. The satellite communication protocols were encrypted. The self-destruct mechanism was calibrated to destroy evidence without killing bystanders. But remote operations had limitations. They required extensive preparation. The weapon system had to be positioned days or weeks in advance, requiring operatives to infiltrate Iran, transport equipment, establish the ambush site. They depended on intelligence about the target's route and timing, and they required the target to follow predictable patterns. Fakhrizadeh's assassination demonstrated both the capability of remote operations and their constraints. Most targets weren't this vulnerable. Most required traditional methods, operatives on the ground, close quarters work, hands-on violence. The remote weapon was a tool for specific situations, not a replacement for Kidon's core methodology. The unit's standard methods remained based on principles developed over 50 years. First, establish extensive surveillance to understand the target's patterns, security measures, and vulnerabilities. This could last weeks or months. Humans are creatures of habit. Even security-conscious people eventually fall into patterns. Kidon surveillance teams identified these patterns and exploited them. Second, develop multiple operation plans based on different scenarios. If the target travels to location A, execute Plan 1. If location B, execute Plan 2. If all primary plans become impossible, fall back to contingency plans. Never rely on a single approach. Third, pre-position resources near likely operational sites. This meant establishing safe houses, caching weapons and equipment, arranging transportation for extraction, creating communications protocols. A Kidon operation might require months of preparation for 15 minutes of action. Fourth, maintain absolute operational security through compartmentalization. The surveillance team didn't know the assassination plan. The assassination team didn't know extraction routes. Support personnel knew only their specific roles. If one element was compromised, others remained protected. Fifth, execute with precision and withdraw immediately. The actual killing was usually the quickest part, seconds of violence after weeks of preparation. Speed reduced exposure time. The longer operatives remained at the scene, the higher the risk of capture. Sixth, destroy evidence and eliminate attribution. Weapons were disposed of in ways that prevented forensic analysis. Clothing was burned, false identification was destroyed, every physical trace was eliminated methodically. The actual killing methods varied by operational requirements. Firearms remained most common because they were reliable and effective. Kidon operatives trained extensively with handguns, primarily small-caliber weapons that could be concealed and suppressed. The .22 caliber Beretta remained popular because subsonic ammunition was quiet, recoil was minimal, and small rounds were less likely to overpenetrate. But firearms had disadvantages. They required close proximity, which meant higher exposure risk. They made noise even when suppressed. They left ballistic evidence, and they were difficult to deploy in locations with security screening. Explosives offered different advantages. They could be planted remotely and detonated from a safe distance. They destroyed evidence through the blast itself. The disadvantage was controlling the blast radius. Explosives powerful enough to kill targets in armored vehicles might also kill civilians, creating political and moral complications. Poisons represented the most sophisticated option. A successful poison operation looked like natural death, avoiding investigation. But poisons required intimate access to the target, contaminating food, drink, medicine, or personal items. This level of access was difficult to achieve, and modern toxicology could detect most poisons. Training for these methods occurred at facilities in Israel. Operatives practiced shooting at specialized ranges that replicated operational conditions, firing at moving targets in low light, engaging multiple targets, shooting from concealment. They trained in close-quarters combat using Krav Maga adapted for life-or-death situations. Explosive training included construction, placement, timing, and detonation. Operatives learned to build bombs from commercial materials, calculate blast radius, design triggering mechanisms. The training emphasized safety because amateur bomb makers killed themselves more often than their targets. Language training was continuous. Operatives needed functional fluency in Arabic, Farsi, and at least 2 European languages. Perfect fluency was unnecessary. International business people spoke imperfect foreign languages regularly, but speech had to be convincing during casual interactions. Legend maintenance required perhaps the most intensive training because it was psychological as much as technical. Operatives lived their cover identities for months, maintaining false histories, fake relationships, fabricated employment records. Under stress, during interrogation, during unexpected questioning, the legend had to hold. This required internalization rather than memorization. Kidon's selection process filtered for people who could maintain this psychological split. Some applicants had perfect technical skills but couldn't sustain false identities under extended deployment. Others were comfortable with deception but lacked judgment to recognize when a legend was failing. The unit wanted operatives who could compartmentalize ruthlessly, switching between identities without confusion. Killing people affected even trained operatives. Some experienced no apparent psychological damage, viewing assassination as a military skill applied in intelligence contexts. Others developed symptoms over time: nightmares, hypervigilance, emotional numbness, difficulty maintaining relationships. The unit provided psychological support, though operatives were often reluctant to use it. The question of moral justification existed in constant tension. Israeli law justified targeted killings as preemptive self-defense against imminent threats. But imminent was interpretable. Was a scientist working on nuclear weapons an imminent threat? Was killing that scientist necessary and proportionate? Different people within Israeli security establishment answered differently. Kidon operatives generally didn't struggle with these questions during operations. They received orders, planned meticulously, executed professionally. The moral reasoning happened at higher levels. Operatives trusted that the authorization process worked, that targets were legitimate, that operations served genuine security interests. The unit's effectiveness could be measured in crude metrics: operations conducted, success rate, targets eliminated. But the real measure was strategic impact. Did assassinations achieve security objectives? Did they deter threats? The answer was complicated and context-dependent. Operation Wrath of God clearly achieved its objective. Everyone involved in Munich was eventually killed, and the message to Palestinian militants was unambiguous. The Iranian scientist campaign slowed nuclear development and created deterrence. Other operations had mixed results. Some removed dangerous individuals. Others created martyrs that strengthened enemy organizations. The broader question was whether systematic assassination was effective strategic policy. Critics argued it created endless cycles of violence, damaged Israel's reputation, and violated legal norms. Supporters insisted it was necessary self-defense in a hostile region. The debate continued within Israeli society, but Kidon operations continued because eliminating specific threats remained tactically necessary. And those threats kept emerging. As Iranian nuclear ambitions persisted despite Fakhrizadeh's death, as Hamas rebuilt capabilities after each conflict, as Hezbollah stockpiled missiles along Israel's northern border, the list of potential targets kept growing. Kidon's operational tempo remained high, but high operational tempo increases error probability. The more operations conducted, the greater the chance that one will fail catastrophically. And Kidon had experienced catastrophic failures before. The worst occurred in Jordan in September 1997. The target was Khalid Mashal, political leader of Hamas, living in Amman under King Hussein's tacit protection. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu authorized the operation despite Jordan being a peace partner. The political calculation was that Mashal's importance justified the diplomatic risk. 2 operatives entered Jordan on Canadian passports. They carried a device designed to spray liquid poison into the target's ear, a Lebanon Tradol derivative that would cause symptoms resembling a heart attack. The delivery method was sophisticated and supposedly untraceable. The weapon had been tested on animals and in laboratory conditions. The operatives located Mashal outside his office building. They approached while he spoke with his driver. One grabbed Mashal while the second sprayed poison into his ear. The attack lasted 3 seconds. They released him and walked away rapidly, expecting him to collapse within minutes. Instead, Mashal's bodyguards immediately pursued. Someone had seen the attack. Okay. The bodyguards tackled both operatives 3 blocks away. Within 10 minutes, both Kidon operatives were in custody. Within an hour, Jordanian intelligence had identified them as Israeli agents. Within 6 hours, King Hussein was on the phone with Netanyahu demanding an explanation. Mashal was dying in a hospital from the poison. Jordan threatened to execute the captured operatives and sever diplomatic relations. The United States intervened, pressuring Israel to provide the antidote. Netanyahu faced a choice between protecting operational security and preventing a major international incident. He chose to provide the antidote. Israeli medical personnel flew to Amman with treatment that saved Mashal's life. In exchange, Jordan released the 2 operatives, but the damage was severe. Jordan expelled Mossad personnel and suspended intelligence cooperation. Hamas gained a propaganda victory, and Kidon's reputation suffered its worst blow since Lillehammer. The Mashal operation failed for multiple reasons. The poison delivery system didn't work as expected. The operatives' approach triggered immediate suspicion. The extraction plan didn't account for rapid pursuit. The political calculation was wrong. And operational security failed at the strategic level when Israel had to reveal classified medical information. The failure prompted thorough review of Kidon procedures. The unit implemented new protocols for weapon testing that included field conditions. They enhanced extraction planning to account for immediate pursuit. They required political approval at the highest levels for operations in countries with formal peace agreements. But operational failures weren't the only challenge. The changing technology environment created fundamental problems. Facial recognition systems at airports made traveling under false identities increasingly risky. Social media meant everyone was photographed constantly. Smartphones with GPS documented every movement. DNA analysis could identify individuals years after operations. Encrypted communications weren't as secure as previously believed. The unit adapted where possible. Operatives underwent cosmetic procedures to alter appearance subtly, modifications sufficient to fool recognition algorithms. They used sophisticated makeup and prosthetics. They avoided smartphone use during operations or used disposable devices. They wore gloves to avoid fingerprints. But these adaptations weren't sufficient for all situations. Some operational environments were too saturated with surveillance. Some targets were too well protected by technology Kidon couldn't defeat. Some countries had counterintelligence capabilities sophisticated enough to detect Israeli operations. Certain missions were becoming impossible using traditional methodology. This drove interest in alternative approaches. Cyber operations could cause accidents remotely. Long-range sniping could engage targets outside security perimeters. Drones could deliver explosives precisely. Each method had applications where traditional Kidon techniques were too dangerous, but alternatives had limitations. Cyber operations required capabilities that Unit 8200 handled, not Kidon. Long-range sniping worked only in specific terrain conditions. Drones left radar tracks. The traditional model, operatives infiltrating, observing, and executing at close range, remained necessary despite mounting challenges. The unit's recruitment faced particular stress. Younger generations had grown up with different attitudes about privacy and identity. Maintaining false personas while completely disconnected from social media felt unnatural. The isolation required for deep cover operations was harder to accept for individuals accustomed to constant connectivity. Some of this reflected actual changes in how humans formed identity in the digital age. Earlier operatives had learned to compartmentalize because their real lives and cover lives were genuinely separate. Modern operatives struggled when phones tracked locations constantly, when colleagues could video call unexpectedly, when absence from social media raised suspicions. Kidon also faced increasing scrutiny from international law and human rights organizations. The United Nations investigated targeted killing programs. Human rights groups documented Kidon operations and challenged their legality. Legal scholars debated whether assassination could ever be justified self-defense. Israel's position was that targeted killings were legal under Israeli law as preemptive self-defense and consistent with international humanitarian law's provisions for military operations against combatants. Critics argued that Israel interpreted imminent too broadly, that non-military personnel weren't legitimate targets, that killing people outside combat zones violated sovereignty. Some proposed operations were rejected because legal justification was too weak. Others proceeded despite legal questions because threat assessment justified action. Israeli officials making these decisions knew that international law was evolving toward greater restrictions on targeted killings. The personal consequences for Kidon operatives added another layer. Some former operatives faced legal action in foreign countries for operations conducted decades earlier. Arrest warrants were issued by European courts. Travel became restricted. Retired operatives couldn't visit certain countries without risking arrest. These legal threats had practical operational impact. Operatives became more cautious about documentation. They insisted on more thorough legal reviews. They demanded stronger commitments from Israeli government about protection if international prosecution occurred. Some experienced operatives chose to leave the unit rather than risk future legal exposure. The recruitment pool shrank. Meanwhile, adversaries adapted their security measures based on studying Kidon's methodology. Iranian security services implemented multi-layered protection for nuclear scientists. Hamas leadership moved constantly, avoided patterns. Hezbollah commanders stayed in southern Lebanon, where Israeli operations were extremely risky. Targets made themselves harder to reach. This created an operational arms race. Kidon developed new techniques to penetrate improved security. Targets enhanced protection in response. The cycle continued. Operations that might have taken weeks to plan in the 1970s required months or years by the 2010 S. The unit size remained relatively constant, even as operational demands increased. There was a limited pool of Israelis with the language skills, physical capability, psychological stability, and willingness to serve in Kidon. Expanding risked diluting quality. So Kidon remained a small, elite organization operating at maximum sustainable tempo. This created burnout problems. Operatives deployed repeatedly faced cumulative stress. Relationships suffered. Maintaining cover required lying to family and friends. Some developed substance abuse issues. The unit's psychological support systems tried to manage these problems, but intelligence culture historically discouraged admitting vulnerability. The broader question was sustainability. Could Kidon maintain operational effectiveness indefinitely while facing mounting technological challenges, legal pressure, adversary adaptation, recruitment difficulties, and personnel burnout? Some within Israeli security establishment believed the unit's traditional model was reaching obsolescence. Others insisted that human intelligence and physical operations would always be necessary. The debate intensified as newer threats emerged. Iranian proxy groups throughout the Middle East presented numerous but relatively low-value targets. Killing one Hezbollah commander didn't significantly impact organizational capability, but ignoring these threats allowed enemies to accumulate strength. The question was how to allocate limited Kidon resources. Some operations continued successfully despite these challenges. In 2016, Kidon operatives reportedly killed a Hezbollah commander in Damascus. In 2018, they allegedly assassinated a Hamas operative in Tunisia. In 2020, the Fakhrizadeh remote weapon system demonstrated technical innovation. The unit remained operationally capable while facing strategic questions about its future. But there were signs of strain. Operations took longer to approve. Some proposed missions were rejected. Others proceeded but were compromised, forcing last-minute aborts. The success rate remained high, but the trend was concerning. Then, in 2023, something changed. The operational environment shifted dramatically. The Hamas attack on October 7, 2023, killed more than 1,200 Israelis and triggered immediate military response. The scale of the assault shocked Israeli intelligence services, which had failed to detect planning for an operation involving thousands of militants. The failure prompted harsh internal criticism and questions about intelligence priorities and resource allocation. Some focused directly on Kidon. Critics argued that the unit had become too focused on Iranian threats while ignoring Hamas's evolving capabilities in Gaza. Kidon operations had killed Iranian scientists and Hezbollah commanders, while Hamas prepared its largest military operation in decades. The strategic assumptions underlying Kidon's mission priorities were suddenly suspect. Defenders countered that the unit operated based on tasking from political and military leadership, not independent strategy. If Israeli government assessed Iranian nuclear program as the primary threat, Kidon executed operations targeting that threat. Hamas wasn't ignored. Israeli military conducted regular operations in Gaza. But the intelligence failure was in assessment and collection, not in Kidon's execution. The debate was fierce but brief. War creates operational demands that override theoretical discussions. Within days of October 7th, Kidon received targeting packages for Hamas leadership. The mission was straightforward: kill the people who planned and authorized the assault, wherever they were hiding. Some targets were in Gaza, embedded within densely populated areas, surrounded by security and tunnel networks. Kidon couldn't reach them without massive military operations already underway. But other targets were outside Gaza, in Qatar, Lebanon, Turkey, Iran. These were accessible to traditional Kidon methodology. The most prominent target was Ismail Haniyeh, Hamas political chief based in Doha, Qatar. He lived openly under Qatari government protection, traveling internationally, meeting with foreign officials. His location was never secret, but Qatar was a U.S. ally hosting major American military bases. Killing Haniyeh in Doha would create massive diplomatic complications. Israeli leadership determined the complications were acceptable given October 7th's magnitude. If Haniya planned the attack and intelligence suggested significant involvement, then he needed to die regardless of where he was hiding. The authorization moved faster than usual. Within weeks, Kidon had operational plans. The operation occurred on July 31st, 2024. Haniya was in Tehran attending the inauguration of Iran's new president, a rare opportunity to target him in a location where Israeli operations were already active. He stayed at a residence used for hosting foreign dignitaries, with Iranian security personnel providing protection. The building had multiple layers of security, but Iranian services didn't expect an attack during a state visit. The explosive device was small, precisely placed, and remotely detonated. Reports suggested it had been planted months earlier, hidden within the building's infrastructure during construction or renovation. The detonation occurred at 2 a.m. while Haniya slept. He died instantly along with a bodyguard. The explosion was contained to his room, a shaped charge designed for assassination rather than demolition. Iranian authorities responded with fury and embarrassment. A high-profile guest had been killed in their capital in a secure facility during a major political event. The operational security failure was humiliating. Iranian officials promised retaliation, but internal recriminations were probably more severe. Someone had penetrated their security, planted explosives undetected, and executed a remote operation. The competence gap between Israeli and Iranian intelligence was painfully obvious. For Kidon, the Haniya operation demonstrated several things. First, long-term planning and patient preparation could overcome significant security obstacles. Second, remote operations eliminated many risks associated with having operatives physically present. Third, striking in Tehran sent a deterrent message beyond simply killing one Hamas leader. And fourth, operations could proceed successfully despite intense international scrutiny. But the operation also revealed ongoing challenges. The device had to be placed months in advance, requiring maintenance of human intelligence networks in Iran, despite intensive counterintelligence efforts. The operation depended on Haniya following predictable travel patterns, and the diplomatic fallout was significant. Even countries sympathetic to Israel's security concerns expressed dismay. Other operations in late 2023 and 2024 targeted Hamas and Hezbollah operatives across the Middle East and Europe. Some succeeded, commanders killed in Lebanon, operatives eliminated in Turkey, logistics coordinators assassinated in Sudan. Others failed, targets who disappeared after warnings, operations aborted when security proved too heavy, attempts compromised by counterintelligence. The success rate remained relatively high, but the operational tempo was unsustainable. This reality forced strategic recalibration. Israeli leadership had to acknowledge that assassination was a tactic, not a strategy. Killing individual terrorists or nuclear scientists could disrupt specific threats, but it didn't resolve underlying conflicts or eliminate enemy organizations. Hamas would replace Haniyeh, Iran would replace dead scientists, Hezbollah would promote new commanders. The threats were systemic, not individual. But while assassination wasn't sufficient as standalone strategy, it remained necessary as tactical capability. Some threats required elimination. Individuals whose skills, knowledge, or leadership couldn't be easily replaced. Identifying which targets met that threshold became crucial. Resources were finite. Operations were risky. Every Kidon mission needed to justify its cost. This led to more rigorous targeting criteria. Proposed operations underwent enhanced review, examining whether assassination would achieve measurable strategic benefit, whether alternative approaches might be more effective, whether timing was optimal, whether operational risk was acceptable, whether diplomatic consequences were manageable. Many proposed operations were rejected during review. The unit conducted fewer missions, but focused on higher-value targets. The internal culture shifted as well. Earlier generations had focused primarily on tactical execution. Newer operatives were encouraged to think more strategically about whether assassination was the right approach. This created tension between operational culture that valued decisive action and analytical culture that questioned whether action was necessary. Israeli government ultimately determined that Kidon operatives should focus on execution while strategic targeting decisions remained with senior intelligence and political leadership. This preserved traditional operational culture while ensuring civilian control over assassination policy. But the compromise didn't fully resolve tensions because operatives on the ground often had better tactical intelligence than decision-makers in Tel Aviv. The unit's operational methodology continued evolving. The success of remote weapon systems led to increased investment in similar technologies. Israeli defense contractors developed various robotic assassination tools, drones carrying shaped charges, explosive devices with facial recognition triggers, autonomous systems that could track and engage targets. Some were deployed operationally, others remained experimental. But technology couldn't replace human judgment in complex environments. Automated systems could identify targets based on facial recognition, but they couldn't assess whether circumstances made assassination appropriate at that specific moment. A human operative might see children nearby and abort. An automated system programmed to kill on recognition couldn't make that distinction. The ethical and practical implications of fully automated assassination were profound and largely unresolved. Kidon's training incorporated technological tools while maintaining traditional skills. Operatives learned to deploy remote weapon systems, but they also continued training in close-quarters combat, shooting, surveillance, and other fundamental capabilities. Future operations would involve both traditional and technological approaches. The unit's relationship with other Mossad divisions became more integrated. Earlier operational culture had emphasized Kidon's independence. Modern operations required closer coordination because technology made isolation less feasible. Signals intelligence guided targeting. Human intelligence provided operational details. Technical surveillance enabled real-time monitoring. Kidon executed missions, but success depended on seamless cooperation. This integration improved effectiveness, but created new security vulnerabilities. More people involved meant more potential for compromise. The benefits of integration were clear, but they came with costs that had to be managed carefully. Recruitment continued to challenge the unit. The pool of qualified candidates remained small, and competition was intense. Unit 8200 recruited computer science specialists. Sayeret Matkal needed operators. Shin Bet recruited for domestic counterterrorism. Private security companies offered lucrative salaries. Kidon competed for talent in a crowded marketplace. The unit's pitch emphasized impact and purpose. Kidon operatives directly protected Israeli security through high-stakes operations that military or police couldn't conduct. They operated at the intersection of intelligence and action. They faced challenges that tested every skill. They worked with the most competent professionals in Israeli intelligence. But the pitch had to acknowledge significant costs. Personal relationships would suffer. Psychological stress was inevitable. Legal risk would persist for decades. Normal life would be difficult. Some potential recruits declined. Others accepted the costs because they believed the mission was worth it. Kidon wanted the second type of person. The question of Kidon's future remained open. Some analysts believed targeted assassination was becoming obsolete, too difficult to execute, too easy to expose, too complicated legally and diplomatically. They argued that cyber operations, economic sanctions, and traditional military action could achieve similar effects with less risk. Others insisted that certain threats required physical elimination and no alternative was comparably effective. In practice, Israeli security policy maintained Kidon as an operational capability while using it more selectively. Operations occurred less frequently, but were generally more significant. The unit focused on threats that genuinely required assassination rather than conducting operations simply because targets were available. The October 7th attack demonstrated that Kidon remained relevant despite changing security environments. Hamas leadership couldn't hide in Gaza or Qatar or Tehran and expect safety. Iranian nuclear scientists couldn't continue weapons development without personal risk. Hezbollah commanders couldn't operate without facing potential assassination. The deterrent effect persisted because enemies knew Israel maintained the capability and willingness to strike. But deterrence had limits. Hamas attacked despite knowing about Kidon. Hezbollah continued operations despite losses. Iran's nuclear program progressed despite dead scientists. Enemies absorbed the costs because they believed their strategic objectives justified the risks. Assassination created friction and raised costs, but didn't eliminate threats entirely. This was perhaps Kidon's ultimate lesson. Targeted killing is a tool, not a solution. It can disrupt specific threats, eliminate dangerous individuals, demonstrate resolve, and deter some adversaries. But it cannot resolve conflicts, change political realities, or create lasting peace. Those require different approaches that intelligence services don't provide. 50 years after Operation Wrath of God, Kidon remained active, capable, and necessary. The unit's methods had evolved from close-range shooting to remote robotic systems, but the core mission was unchanged: identify threats to Israeli security and eliminate them before they could act. Whether this approach was strategically wise, legally justified, or morally defensible remained debated. But the operational reality was clear. As long as Israel faced existential threats from hostile actors who couldn't be deterred through conventional means, Kidon would continue operating. The unit's structure would adapt to technological change. Its methods would evolve with security environments. Its legal and ethical frameworks would be questioned and refined. But the fundamental capability would persist because Israeli leadership believed it was necessary for national survival. The men and women who served in Kidon understood this. They knew they were part of a controversial organization conducting operations many considered immoral or illegal. They knew their work would never be publicly acknowledged. They knew they carried personal risk that would follow them for decades. They chose to serve anyway because they believed their actions protected their country from threats that would otherwise succeed. Some former operatives left with pride in their accomplishments. Others left with doubts about whether operations achieved strategic objectives. A few left with trauma that never fully healed. The experience was different for each person, shaped by their operations, their commanders, their personal resilience. But all carried secrets they would never fully share. Details of operations that remained classified decades after completion. Names of targets and methods of killing that would never be publicly confirmed. Operational techniques that still provided advantage. The secrecy was permanent, extending beyond their service, beyond their lifetimes. This was Kidon's final reality, a unit that shaped Middle Eastern security policy through operations that officially never occurred, conducted by operatives whose service was never acknowledged, achieving results that could never be measured precisely because success meant preventing attacks that didn't happen. The unit existed in shadows by necessity. And in those shadows, operations continued. Surveillance teams tracked new targets. Technical specialists developed new tools. Operatives trained for missions not yet authorized. The machinery of assassination remained active because threats remained active. The cycle that began with Munich in 1972 continued into 2024 and would likely continue for years ahead. The Kidon unit was bayonet, the tip of the spear, the sharp edge of Israeli intelligence, the instrument used when diplomacy failed and military action was premature. Whether this instrument was wielded wisely remained debatable, but its existence and effectiveness were not. In the world of intelligence operations, where success was often invisible and failure was catastrophic, Kidon maintained a reputation for competence that few other organizations could match. That reputation was built on 50 years of operations, hundreds of assassinations, and an operational culture that demanded excellence because mistakes meant death. Sometimes for operatives, always for targets, occasionally for bystanders. The unit learned from failures, adapted to challenges, and maintained capability despite mounting obstacles. This was its legacy, Not the individual operations or specific body count, but the sustained demonstration that Israel could reach its enemies anywhere and impose consequences. Whether future generations would judge this legacy as justified self-defense or extrajudicial killing remained uncertain. History's verdict depended on outcomes that hadn't yet occurred, whether Israel survived as a nation, whether peace eventually came to the region, whether the threats Kidon addressed proved existential or manageable through alternative means. But for operatives currently serving in Kidon, historical judgment was abstract and distant. Their concern was the next operation, the next target, the next mission where planning and training would determine whether they succeeded or failed, lived or died, protected their country, or exposed it to retaliation. They worked in the present, executing operations designed to shape the future, while the past accumulated in classified files that documented every death, every success, every failure. The files were extensive, thousands of pages detailing operations across continents and decades, reports written in bureaucratic language that described violence in clinical terms, photographs of targets before and after-action reviews analyzing what worked and failed, psychological evaluations of operatives who'd killed too many times, budgets that translated human life into operational costs, the documentation of a unit that existed primarily through its documentation because operational security prohibited public acknowledgement. These files were Kidon's real legacy, the institutional memory that captured lessons learned and preserved them for future operatives. The knowledge accumulated over 50 years, refined through trial and error. This knowledge made current operations more effective because each generation learned from predecessors without repeating every mistake. And so Kidon continued, adaptive, capable, controversial, necessary, or abhorrent, depending on perspective. The unit that officially didn't exist but was known to every intelligence service globally. The operatives who carried false passports and true beliefs about protecting their nation. The missions that were meticulously planned and violently executed. The cycle of surveillance, targeting, assassination, and evaluation that had become institutional routine. In Israel, in Qatar, in Iran, in Lebanon, in Turkey, and in capitals across Europe and beyond, Kidon maintained presence through networks of operatives, intelligence assets, safe houses, and technical capabilities. The infrastructure was invisible but substantial, built over decades and maintained because dismantling it would leave gaps that enemies might exploit. The next operation was already in planning. The next target already under surveillance, the next mission already approved or awaiting authorization. Because the threats continued, the responses continued, and Kidon remained the instrument Israel deployed when assassination was deemed necessary for security. That was the simple truth underlying all complexity. Kidon existed because Israel believed targeted killing was sometimes necessary, possessed the capability to execute such operations professionally, and was willing to accept the moral, legal, and diplomatic consequences. Whether that belief was correct would be debated for generations, but the unit itself was real, operational, and active. The bayonet remained sharp,